Welcome back to Renewing Hope on Ave Maria Radio. I'm Mike Vasquez. We're talking today about withdrawal and the importance of detoxification in the process of helping a loved one or a friend who's dealing with substance abuse. Today we've got an expert panel with us, Dr. Charles Wadley, board-certified addiction physician, Joe Meintz, national interventionist and director of admissions at St. Gregory Retreat Center, and Clayton Walters, director of mission at St. Gregory Retreat Centers, who's also directed and run large national treatment centers for over 20 years around the U.S. And before the break, we were talking about withdrawal and the symptoms and the impact of it being both a barrier to getting help, and then once you get to a treatment center, sometimes it can be a barrier to help being effective. And a lot of times families don't realize that this is even an issue. A lot of times even the person dealing with the addiction doesn't realize specifically how to deal with it. And I don't know, Clayton, as you see that, and I know you've been in programs both that used detoxification in the beginning, and you've also seen programs that don't do detoxification. And did you see some big differences there as people face this issue?
Absolutely, Mike. And in the years of dealing with folks with these problems, one of the number one fears that they have is the physical withdrawal that they're going to go through. I don't know, many of you may be familiar with the movie about the Ray Charles story and the scenes that are depicted in that movie of the withdrawal that Ray Charles is going through. For some of you that are closer to my age, you may have seen Man with the Golden Arm with Frank Sinatra, which also depicts some very, very severe physical withdrawal problems. So that's probably one of the number one fears that people have. So as a family member, that's going to be one of the number one objections you're going to get as you're trying to deal with a loved one with this problem. Most programs separate, which creates even more of a barrier for families because it's a separate issue. The detoxification needs to take place before somebody enters most programs. So the programs that are most effective are those that deal with the continuum of care from the point of taking care of the detoxification and going immediately into treatment.
You know, that's one of the challenges I think we've evolved to in healthcare here in America. Most emergency rooms in the U.S. have gone to a triage, stabilization, and discharge method where you may be dealing with overdose symptoms, withdrawal symptoms off of a drug or alcohol, and really the emergency room will just verify that you're not at risk. They'll stabilize you, give you medication, and then discharge you. And I think that's what's happened is you really don't find the ability to have a medically managed detox except for in certain programs around the country because we have evolved away from that. Hospitals don't get reimbursed. The reimbursement models have gotten to a point where they can't afford to admit you, so they just hold you in the emergency room for 8 hours, and then you're back on the street. And obviously, that's not considered a treatment program. But you know, Dr. Wadley, you saw that probably as you practiced medicine over the years.
Well, and I wanted to follow up on a couple of comments that Joe and Clayton had mentioned earlier. You know, the detox, the people come in, sometimes their motivation is my supplier's gone, I'm out of money, and I go in for detox and withdrawal, but then I'm right back out on the street. And having a continuity of care where that detox unit, that withdrawal treatment can occur proximal to where the actual treatment center is ideal. Because you have them connected, you've seen that success, you've worked with them for that period of time of hopefully a few days to a week to get them off the medication. The other thing is, as you've talked so much, Michael, is people having to become experts on getting services. And now we got this dichotomous treatment where I got to find detox for them, then I got to find a place for them to go. And how many people do we lose at the bars between the detox unit and the substance abuse treatment center?
You know, that's a good point because you really see the fact that people a lot of times when they do try to get a detox, they go in with the idea that they recognize they need treatment. They maybe go into the emergency room or they go into even a short-term detoxification. They feel so well physically that they really think they can handle it now and discharge themselves and really realize they haven't dealt with the addiction issue. They've just dealt with the physical side effects of that. So if you think about somebody, those of you out there think, well, I just can't imagine what that would be like. A lot of times when you are on a medication and you don't take your medication regularly in between doses, that uneasy feeling, that uncomfortable feeling, those are actually withdrawal symptoms. So you can have withdrawal symptoms from almost any medication, prescription, and obviously most illicits because of the fact that that craving presents itself as an uncomfortable feeling in the body, and that uncomfortable feeling gets satisfied by taking the next dose. And so a lot of times these withdrawal symptoms are the reason that addiction continues. Heroin addicts, for example, today, most of the heroin addicts after that they're using have lost the euphoric effect. And what they're doing is really trying to keep the withdrawal symptoms at bay. They use just to not feel like they're going to die, because as they start to withdraw, it's like a case of the flu like we've never had before. And what happens is the next time I take my next hit, my next dose, I all of a sudden notice that all those terrible withdrawal symptoms go away. So now I'm just chasing the withdrawal symptom. It's not odd to see people on painkillers who've had surgery 10 years ago, and they're still taking the painkiller, not because of the fact that there's pain from the surgery, but there's discomfort from the withdrawal of getting off the painkiller. I know, Joe, you probably see that all the time.
Absolutely. And, a really interesting thing that Dr. Wadley had pointed out is, it used to be where you'd need to kind of seek out a specialty detox to really, if you wanted the detox process managed well, you need to go and try to find some place that was up for that challenge. And what you had said, that how many people did we lose between the detox process and the bar on the way to treatment? The number's significant. And you're right. Years ago, I'd actually worked with one of those just standalone detox processes that was not affiliated with a treatment center, and that was part of my job, was to help people start confronting this idea of what does this look like long term, where are we going to help you actually really confront your life. And it really plays into a big issue here, because detox is notably something that's scary to confront. People will avoid that process if they can, because a lot of times it's just not realistic to somebody that it doesn't have to be this miserable, drawn-out process. And what's so important is to make sure when you're dealing with somebody who's been practicing not confronting their life for a long time, is to ensure that they're not going to have to confront lots of things all at once, or a continuous succession of different issues that they're going to have to confront today and then another one tomorrow, and making all these big life-changing decisions. And it really does play into the process very much so that when you go to detox, you've already confronted that you're going to deal with this process. You don't have to just detox. Now I'm going to decide if I'm going to go to treatment, because these are all really big decisions that to somebody from the outside looking in may look as though, well, of course that's the next thing you would do. You'd go to treatment. But to someone who's not adept at making those decisions for their life, those are really big things. And so it really is important to, first of all, make sure that you're looking at something that's going to handle the process well, and is also going to streamline that flow into a treatment program so you can deal with the rest of your life. I think there's a percentage, it's either 94 or 97% of people that undergo just a detox without treatment following up will relapse. That's basically everyone. So it's really so important to consider detox as being part of the treatment process, and I think that's been mentioned a couple times, and that's a really big deal.
That's a key point, because when you think about it, you finally now have challenged that unreasonable thinking. You've finally sat that person down, that loved one, and gotten them to realize they need help. They go to this detox because they need it as they withdraw, and all of a sudden that entire effort was lost because they decided they didn't need treatment. And as you said, they're going to be right back in using, because 97% of the people relapse.
Absolutely right.
And it's something that is just a staggering percentage. And so it's why we get back to the fact that you want to understand what you're dealing with. Use us as a resource, because this is not just something that everybody's an expert walking around. Is the fact that when this does happen to you, and it'll happen to 1 out of 3 people listening today, whether you're in Naples or whether you're in Detroit listening to the show today, you're going to have this happen. 1 out of the 3 people you know will have this happen to them, that you instantly have to become an expert. And again, the idea is just thinking, well, I just need to find a treatment center who can treat them. And it's not that easy, because it's become so complex, because drugs and alcohol have evolved so much over the years, and the different drugs and different alcohol, not different alcohol, but the different levels in our understanding of how alcohol acts on the body. And that kind of leads me to one question, Dr. Wadley. Let's start to talk a little bit about some of those differences in what withdrawal looks like. And I know with alcohol, they call it the DTs. Can you kind of help explain some of that?
Well, DTs is the extreme. It's kind of the final stage. There's various stages for alcohol, benzodiazepines as well, and sedative hypnotics kind of come in the same category. And that's about 72 hours out without treatment. One thing I want to point out regarding DTs, if you progress to DTs, mortality, that means you die, is quite high. It's high as compared to most of the other substances. It's rare that anybody dies from opioid withdrawal, but it's miserable and everybody feels like they're going to die. And sometimes DTs, you don't feel quite as bad, and it catches up with you quickly because it's such a short-acting substance. And the shorter the acting substance, the faster the withdrawal. And they get into the DTs. And historically, it's been as high as 25-30%. I think with recognizing and interventions now, it's down to 5 to 10%. But the reality is people can die from that. It's very important. You know, if you remember the old cartoons, or at least I do, on Saturday morning, and they'd picture the drunk stumbling around. He was in his DTs, not intoxicated, but he was coming off of it, and he saw the pink elephants and stuff. They hallucinate to that extreme. They can get into seizures, which is very problematic, obviously, particularly if nobody's around and it's unattended. So that's the extreme point of the alcohol. The other milder stage is where you want to catch it. That's what you do in a detox program, is you're monitoring them with the symptom tool assessment. There's something called the CIWA, which is commonly used, or should be. It's the Clinical Inventory of Withdrawal from Alcohol, and it monitors various symptoms. And we have professionals rate those symptoms, and you can start to see the withdrawal increase. And once it hits a certain score, you can start giving medication to help address some of those things.
You know, and it's interesting because as you look at that, I've actually picked people up at the airport and couldn't get 3 blocks away until I had to stop and get a bottle or a quart of beer to allow them to have some alcohol in their system to keep the DTs at bay until I could get them to your medical unit, because that's just, it's amazing how you know, until you've seen it, the impact that has on people. And the problem gets into the fact that they become nauseated and then seizures, and then obviously it could lead to stroke and death. And so though opiates and heroin users feel like they're going to die, people who are coming off of alcohol actually do die because of the physical impact. So it's amazing as you look at that. Talk about a little bit more off of alcohol. What are some of the differences that we see as you come off of either prescription medication or illicit drugs that you see? So a lot of people talk about, well, I don't need to detox or stabilize off of pot, but how about cocaine, crack, meth, some of the more common street drugs that people use, and how do you deal with those?
Well, fortunately, their risk for catastrophic withdrawal is pretty low. I kind of simplify it and say all they want to do is sleep and eat, because if you think about what we talked about earlier, withdrawal is kind of a rebound from the effects of those types of substances. And you identified stimulants. Well, what do you do with stimulants? I don't sleep. I'm very active. I'm up and about, and I don't have much appetite. So you take it away abruptly, and all of a sudden I'm withdrawing. I'm tired. I'm sedated. I get despondent. I can get depressed, and they can look like a clinical depression. And sometimes they have a voracious appetite that they just can't wait to get into it. That may be more of a supportive thing than it is having to intervene with medications, but it's still important to have that support while they're going through that process.
You know, Clayton, you've seen this a lot as people come into treatment centers. How does that impact, or what do you see?
Well, building on what Dr. Wiley was just saying, because heroin, cocaine, marijuana, these issues are not a life-at-risk detoxification. However, that listlessness, that anxiety, that sleeplessness makes people ill-prepared to succeed at treatment.
And, you know, it's interesting how if you've ever talked to a sheriff or somebody in the law enforcement industry who deals with people in jail, that is one of the challenges. They see that people will come into jail and get added charges because of this anxiety and acting out. And a lot of it's because they're actually withdrawing, and they end up causing more problems than they even had going into the jail because of the fact that as they withdraw in jail, it's kind of the old term cold turkey. And as they do that, they start to really panic, and that panic creates them to act out either violently or at least create more, more
Mike,
challenges.
And they may be removed from treatment for those reasons that you're mentioning, or they may decide to leave treatment for an inability to deal with those issues.
This isn't the old, for those that may remember, if you're old enough, the old Mayberry RFD that had the town drunk, and they just put him in the jail, gave him a key, and he got out when he was done. It's not typically that simple.
So the old drunk tank doesn't really work the way you would think.
There are inherent risks, and it's uncomfortable, and once they're out of that tank, they go out and start using again.
So, and Joe, when you actually intervened with people and tried to get them help, Did you try to do any education with the families, or did they recognize that the detox was a key piece of this, or has it just evolved more recently as we've understood it more and there's more tools available to the physicians and the medical community?
Well, a couple of points. First of all, yeah, it's definitely evolved a lot more in the years recently, but it was always interesting to me because a family, they're never all that familiar, at least it didn't seem like it, but they would always ask me, well, will he need to detox? And the first question, that was usually the first question when we started talking about treatment, and the easy answer is, well, ask him. He'll tell you. That was something that was always a truth. If somebody needed to detox, they were not going to put themselves at risk by saying, no, I don't need to. They'd say, yeah, I need to detox. It's going to be a scary thing. But it was always interesting how much planning I, as an interventionist, especially for the transportation, the intervention was one thing. Getting someone's agreement to go into treatment was a major part of it. But when somebody was a very heavy alcohol user, benzodiazepine user, we'd really have to plan ahead quite a lot to ensure that we had a way to transport them to treatment. I had one gentleman in San Diego, and we needed to make sure that the intervention happened at a certain time, and throughout that process we were kind of under the gun because I knew that I was going to have to drive this guy across the country to make sure that we had a way to get him some beer periodically if we missed that last flight out for the day. And it really is a serious issue. But the nice thing is since detoxification centers have gotten better, and most of them have gotten better, some much more so than others, we at least have a way to help somebody confront the entirety of their addiction issue. Look, this is going to come to a head. You know it will. Everybody ends up in that detox phase sooner or later. You either run out of money, like we said earlier, or something happens where you're separated between what you need to stay okay. And everybody's always waiting for the next time where that comes up. If you can really approach somebody and say, look, we can handle this really, really well. It's going to be a lot easier than you think. If we're able to interject some calm in that thought process, it's amazing how much more willing somebody is, because that's their number one concern. Now we're seeing this a lot more prevalently with the advent of more and more prescription addiction issues. It used to just be the heroin and the alcohol, but with the prescription drugs, we're seeing this come up in a demographic that we'd have never thought of before.
That's a great point, Joe, and I think let's pick that up after the break. Today we've been discussing with our expert panel withdrawal and the importance of detoxification, and we come back, let's talk about really what that means and the impact of what it has on the people you're caring about and how it becomes a barrier maybe even to them getting help. I'm Mike Vasquez, and you're listening to Renewing Hope on Ave Maria Radio.